The sky above Earth was no longer empty and peaceful. For centuries, humanity had looked up at the stars, wondering if they were alone in the universe. That question was answered one fateful morning when the horizon lit up with a sight both beautiful and terrifying. Ships, massive alien ships, filled the skies. Their shapes were unlike anything humans had ever seen, sleek and angular, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. They hovered silently over major cities, casting long shadows that seemed to swallow hope itself. People stood frozen, staring upward, unsure whether to feel awe or fear. News outlets scrambled to cover the event, broadcasting live footage from every corner of the globe. The ships didn't attack immediately. Instead, they waited, as if giving humanity time to process their presence. Then came the message. A voice transmitted directly into every device capable of receiving sound. It wasn't human, but it spoke perfect English, each word dripping with authority. "I am Supreme Commander Vraxthal of the Zorathian Empire," the voice boomed. "You are now under our dominion. Surrender unconditionally, and you will be integrated into our empire. Resist, and you will be annihilated." The declaration sent shockwaves through governments worldwide. Emergency meetings were called, military forces put on high alert, and citizens urged to stay indoors. But chaos quickly spread. Panic erupted in streets around the world as people tried to flee or prepare for what might come next. Social media buzzed with theories, prayers, and cries for help. Humanity had faced disasters before, but nothing like this. Not an enemy from beyond the stars demanding absolute obedience. In Washington, D.C., Rachel Monroe sat in a dimly lit conference room at the headquarters of the Global Defense Initiative, GDI. She was a woman in her mid-30s, sharp-eyed and determined, with dark hair tied neatly into a bun. As one of the highest-ranking officials in the organization, she had spent years preparing for threats to global security. Yet none of those plans accounted for an alien invasion. Her phone buzzed constantly with updates, but she ignored it, focusing instead on the holographic map projected onto the table in front of her. Red dots marked the locations of the alien vessels, their positions eerily static. Across the table, Daniel Carter leaned forward, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He was older than Rachel by a decade, his face lined with stress and experience. Once a decorated Marine, he'd left active duty after losing too many friends in conflicts that never seemed to end. Now, he worked as an astrophysicist, studying distant galaxies and hoping to find answers about the universe's mysteries. But today the mystery had arrived on Earth's doorstep, and Daniel found himself pulled back into a role he thought he'd left behind. "They're not just here to conquer," Daniel said finally, breaking the tense silence. His voice was calm but carried an edge of urgency. "Look at how they've positioned themselves. They're covering all the major population centers, economic hubs, industrial zones, political capitals. This isn't random. They know exactly what they're doing." Rachel nodded, though her expression remained grim. "And they haven't fired a single shot yet. Why announce themselves like this? If they wanted to destroy us, they could have done it already." "Maybe they don't want destruction," Daniel replied. "At least not right away. They're testing us, seeing how we react, waiting to see if we'll break before they even start." Before Rachel could respond, the door opened and a young officer stepped inside. His uniform was crisp, but his face betrayed the strain of the day's events. "Ma'am, sir," he began, addressing them both. "We've received reports of smaller ships descending toward several cities. Eyewitnesses say they're deploying ground forces." Daniel exchanged a glance with Rachel. Neither needed to say what they were thinking. The waiting game was over. The Zorathians were making their move. In New York City, Jason Miller crouched behind a pile of rubble, clutching a rifle he barely knew how to use. Until a few hours ago, he'd been an ordinary mechanic, fixing cars in a garage near Times Square. When the alien ships appeared, he'd joined the crowd outside, curious like everyone else. But curiosity turned to terror when the first explosions rocked the city. Buildings crumbled, fires raged, and screams filled the air as strange insect-like machines descended from the sky, firing beams of energy that disintegrated everything in their path. Jason hadn't planned to fight. He'd only grabbed the rifle because someone dropped it while running past him. But now, surrounded by smoke and ash, he realized there was no choice. Survivors huddled nearby, some armed, others trembling with fear. Among them was Laura Hayes, a wiry woman in her late 20s with glasses perched precariously on her nose. She clutched a laptop bag tightly to her chest, its contents unknown but clearly precious. "What do we do?" one man asked, his voice shaking. "They're everywhere. We can't just sit here," Jason snapped, surprising even himself with the authority in his tone. "If we stay, they'll find us. We need to keep moving." Laura nodded, adjusting her glasses. "There's a subway station 2 blocks east. If we can get underground, maybe we can lose them." "No guarantees," Jason muttered, but he motioned for the group to follow him anyway. Moving cautiously through the wreckage, they avoided open areas where the alien drones patrolled. Every step felt like walking through a nightmare. The once familiar streets of Manhattan were unrecognizable, reduced to ruins in mere hours. Bodies lay scattered among the debris, reminders of how quickly life could be extinguished. When they reached the subway entrance, Jason hesitated. The stairs led down into darkness, offering safety, or a trap. Before he could decide, a loud whirring noise filled the air. One of the drones had spotted them. Its red eyes glowed menacingly as it hovered closer, raising its weapon. "Move!" Jason shouted, shoving Laura ahead of him. Bullets ricocheted off the walls as the group scrambled down the stairs. Behind them, the drone fired again, collapsing part of the ceiling and sealing off the entrance. Coughing from the dust, they pressed onward into the tunnels, hearts pounding. Back at GDI headquarters, Rachel listened intently as field reports poured in. Cities across the globe were under attack, and resistance efforts were being crushed almost as quickly as they formed. Despite the overwhelming odds, however, there were glimmers of defiance. Guerrilla fighters like Jason and his group were launching hit-and-run attacks, striking at the invaders and disappearing before retaliation could come. It wasn't enough to turn the tide, but it proved that humanity wasn't ready to surrender. "Without a fight, we need more than courage," Rachel said aloud, mostly to herself. Turning to Daniel, she added, "We need a plan, something that gives us a fighting chance." Daniel rubbed his temples, deep in thought. "Their technology is far beyond ours, but it's not invincible. Everything I've seen suggests they rely heavily on quantum entanglement fields to coordinate their forces. If we could disrupt those fields, it would blind them," Rachel finished, catching his meaning. "But developing something like that won't be easy. We'd need resources, scientists, and time, things we don't have." "We'll make do," Daniel said firmly, "because if we don't, there won't be a tomorrow for any of us." As the weight of their task settled over them, Rachel picked up her communicator. There was much to organize, many risks to take. But one thing was certain: humanity's survival depended on finding a way to fight back against an enemy that demanded obedience and threatened annihilation. The days that followed the initial invasion were a blur of chaos and destruction. Fires raged unchecked in cities around the world, their orange glow lighting up the night sky like a grim imitation of sunsets. The Zorathians had established control over key areas, but their ground forces moved methodically rather than aggressively. They seemed content to let humanity wear itself down with fear and confusion, as if they knew resistance would crumble under the weight of despair. In New York City, Jason Miller and his small group of survivors huddled in the dark tunnels of the subway system. The air was damp and thick with the smell of rust and mildew, but it was safer than the surface. Laura Hayes sat on a broken bench, her laptop open despite the lack of power. She tapped furiously at the keys, trying to connect to any surviving network or database. Her glasses slid down her nose and she pushed them back impatiently. "We need information," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "We can't fight blind." Jason leaned against a wall, his rifle resting across his knees. He hadn't slept since the invasion began, and exhaustion tugged at the edges of his mind. Still, he forced himself to stay alert. "What kind of information?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. "Anything," Laura replied, without looking up. "Maps, troop movements, weak points in their tech, if we're lucky, maybe even a way to contact other survivors." Jason frowned. You think anyone's left out there? I know they are, Laura said firmly. People don't give up that easily, not when everything they love is on the line. Her words struck a chord with Jason. He thought about his younger sister who lived just a few blocks away from where the first attack hit. He hadn't heard from her since the invasion began, and guilt gnawed at him for not checking on her sooner. But going back above ground meant risking capture, or worse. For now, staying hidden felt like the only option. Meanwhile, at GDI headquarters, Daniel Carter and Rachel Monroe worked tirelessly to piece together a strategy. The alien ships continued to loom ominously in the skies, their presence a constant reminder of Earth's vulnerability. Scientists and engineers filled the sprawling underground facility, running tests on fragments of Zorathian technology recovered from battle zones. Each discovery brought new questions rather than answers. They're using quantum entanglement fields to synchronize their operations, Daniel explained during one of their late-night meetings. He stood in front of a large screen displaying complex diagrams and equations. Rachel sat nearby, her brow furrowed as she tried to keep up. It's what allows their drones, soldiers, and ships to act as one cohesive unit. If we could disrupt those fields, it might give us an opening, Rachel finished for him. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. But how do we do that? We don't have the resources or the tech to match theirs. Daniel hesitated before responding. We don't need to match them. We just need to exploit their weaknesses. Every system has flaws, even theirs. Rachel nodded slowly. All right. What do you need to make this happen? Time, Daniel said simply. And access to their systems. Without that, we're shooting in the dark. Before Rachel could respond, an alarm blared through the facility. Red lights flashed along the walls, signaling an incoming transmission. A young technician rushed into the room holding a tablet. Ma'am, sir, we've intercepted something from the Zorathians. It's unusual. What is it? Rachel demanded, standing abruptly. The technician handed her the tablet. On the screen was a series of symbols and patterns unlike anything human. Beneath them, however, was a translated message. Surrender your leaders, comply, and your species will be spared. Rachel exchanged a glance with Daniel. The demand was clear and chilling. The Zorathians weren't just interested in conquest, they wanted submission. By targeting Earth's leadership, they aimed to break humanity's spirit. They're testing us, Daniel said quietly. Seeing if we'll hand over our own people to save ourselves. And if we refuse? Rachel asked, though she already knew the answer. Then they escalate, Daniel replied grimly. Which means we're running out of time. Across the Atlantic, in London, another pocket of resistance was forming. Sarah Bennett, a nurse who had been working at a hospital when the invasion began, found herself leading a group of survivors holed up in an abandoned warehouse. The building was old and crumbling, but its thick walls provided some protection from the alien drones patrolling the streets. Sarah moved among the wounded, tending to burns, cuts, and broken bones with whatever supplies she could scavenge. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped a bandage around a man's arm, but her voice remained steady. You'll be all right, she assured him, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. One of the survivors, a teenager named Alex, approached her cautiously. His face was streaked with dirt, and his eyes darted nervously toward the boarded-up windows. Do you think help is coming? He asked in a whisper. Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to lie, but she also couldn't afford to crush the fragile. Hope that kept them going. I don't know, she admitted finally, but we can't count on anyone else to save us. We have to take care of each other. Alex nodded, though disappointment lingered in his expression. He turned to leave, but Sarah stopped him with a gentle hand on his shoulder. Stay close, she said softly. We're stronger together. As the hours dragged on, the group grew quieter, their energy sapped by hunger and fear. Outside, the distant hum of alien machinery served as a constant reminder of the danger lurking beyond their makeshift sanctuary. Despite the odds, Sarah refused to give up. She knew they couldn't win, Not yet, but survival was its own form of defiance. Back in Washington, D.C., Rachel convened an emergency meeting with top military officials and scientists. The room buzzed with tension as everyone debated the best course of action. Some argued for surrender, believing compliance was the only way to avoid total annihilation. Others insisted on fighting no matter the cost. "We can't roll over and die," one general snapped, slamming his fist on the table. "If we show weakness, they'll crush us completely. And if we fight blindly, we'll lose everything," countered a politician, her voice rising. "There are billions of lives at stake here." Rachel listened silently, letting the arguments wash over her. When the noise reached a fever pitch, she stood, her presence commanding immediate attention. "Enough," she said sharply. "Arguing won't change the fact that we're outnumbered and outgunned. But giving up isn't an option either." She turned to Daniel, who stood quietly in the corner. "Tell them your plan." Daniel stepped forward, addressing the room with quiet confidence. "We focus on disrupting their quantum entanglement fields. Without them, their forces lose coordination. It's risky, and it won't win the war overnight, but it buys us time to regroup and adapt." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Finally, the general spoke. "How do we get close enough to pull this off?" "That's where we need your help," Daniel replied. "We'll need volunteers, people willing to go deep behind enemy lines and plant devices capable of generating interference pulses. It won't be easy, and the chances of survival are slim." For a moment, no one spoke. Then, one by one, hands began to rise. Soldiers, scientists, civilians, all united by a shared determination to protect their home. That night, as the facility quieted, Daniel returned to his lab. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders, but he pushed it aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. Around him, machines whirred and screens flickered with data. He worked late into the night, refining designs and running simulations. At some point, Rachel joined him, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. She placed one beside him and leaned against the desk, watching him work. "Do you really think this will work?" she asked after a long pause. Daniel glanced up, his expression unreadable. "Honestly, I don't know, but it's the best shot we've got." Rachel nodded, sipping her coffee. "Then let's make sure it counts." Outside, the alien ship still loomed in the sky, casting long shadows over a planet struggling to survive. Humanity's future hung in the balance, uncertain and fragile. Yet amidst the fear and despair, sparks of resistance burned brightly, refusing to be extinguished. The plan was set, but it carried risks that made even the bravest hesitate. Daniel Carter stood in the center of a dimly lit briefing room, surrounded by a mix of soldiers, engineers, and civilians who had volunteered for what could easily be called a suicide mission. The goal was clear: infiltrate one of the Zorathian command hubs located deep beneath Chicago and retrieve critical data on their quantum entanglement systems. If successful, they could use the information to develop a way to disrupt the aliens. Coordination, giving humanity a fighting chance. Rachel Monroe watched from the corner of the room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She didn't like sending people into such danger, but she knew there was no other choice. Every second they delayed gave the Zorathians more time to solidify their control. The stakes were impossibly high, and failure wasn't an option. "Listen, up," Daniel began, his voice calm but firm. He pointed to a holographic map projected onto the table. "This is where we're going, a heavily guarded underground facility. It's shielded against most scans, so we'll have to go in blind. Our job is simple: get inside, download whatever data we can find, and get out before they realize what we're doing." A soldier raised his hand. "What happens if they catch us?" Daniel met the man's gaze without flinching. "Then we fight until we can't anymore. But our priority is the mission, not survival." "Got it?" The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. No one spoke, but nods of agreement rippled through the group. They all knew the odds were stacked against them, but something deeper than fear drove them forward, a shared determination to protect their home. Jason Miller sat cross-legged on the cold floor of the subway tunnel, cleaning his rifle with slow, deliberate movements, His mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. He hadn't expected to be part of this mission, but when Rachel Monroe reached out to the scattered pockets of resistance, his name came up. Laura Hayes vouched for him, saying he had leadership skills and nerves of steel. Whether that was true or not, Jason couldn't say. But here he was, preparing to walk straight into the heart of enemy territory. Laura herself was busy tinkering with a small device the size of a deck of cards. It looked unassuming, but it held the key to their success, or failure. The device, designed by Daniel and his team, would interface directly with the Zorathian systems and extract the data they needed. Laura adjusted a few wires, her fingers moving quickly despite the tension in the air. "You sure this thing will work?" Jason asked, breaking the silence. "It has to," Laura replied without looking up. Her tone was confident, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "If it doesn't, we're wasting our time." Jason nodded, though unease gnawed at him. Trusting technology, especially untested technology, felt risky. But then again, everything about this mission was risky. All they could do was hope for the best and prepare for the worst. As the team prepared to move out, Sarah Bennett arrived at the rendezvous point outside Chicago. She had joined the mission reluctantly, driven less by bravery than by necessity. With medical supplies dwindling and injuries mounting among the survivors she'd been helping, she saw this as her only chance to make a difference. If the mission succeeded, it might save countless lives, including those of the people she cared about most. Sarah carried a backpack filled with basic medical tools and emergency supplies. She knew she wouldn't be able to treat serious wounds under combat conditions, but she hoped to at least stabilize anyone injured during the operation. As she approached the group, Jason gave her a curt nod of acknowledgement. They hadn't spoken much since meeting earlier that day, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. They were in this together, for better or worse. The journey to the command hub was fraught with peril. The team traveled in a stolen armored vehicle, its exterior painted black to blend into the shadows. They avoided main roads, sticking to back alleys and abandoned streets littered with debris. Above them, alien drones patrolled the skies, their red eyes scanning for movement. Every sound, the crunch of tires on broken glass, the creak of metal shifting in the wind, set their nerves on edge. When they reached the outskirts of the city, the driver killed the engine and parked the vehicle in the ruins of an old factory. From there, they continued on foot, moving silently through the darkness. The entrance to the command hub was hidden beneath layers of rubble, accessible only through a narrow maintenance tunnel. Laura led the way, using a handheld scanner to locate the exact position of the hatch. "This is it," she whispered, pointing to a rusted metal grate embedded in the ground. "We need to move fast." Jason knelt beside the grate and pried it open with a crowbar. The smell of damp earth and machinery wafted up from below. One by one, the team descended into the tunnel, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The air grew colder the deeper they went, and the walls vibrated, faintly with the hum of alien technology. Inside the command hub, the atmosphere was eerily quiet. Rows of glowing consoles lined the walls, pulsating with energy. Strange symbols danced across the screens, unreadable but hypnotic. At the center of the room stood a massive cylindrical structure, its surface etched with intricate patterns that shimmered like liquid metal. This, Laura realized, was the core of the quantum entanglement system. "Okay, everyone," she said, pulling the device from her pocket. "I need 10 minutes. Stay alert." While Laura worked, the rest of the team fanned out to cover the entrances. Jason took position near the main doorway, his rifle trained on the corridor beyond. Sarah stayed close to Laura, ready to act if anything went wrong. The seconds ticked by agonizingly slowly, each one stretching into eternity. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the chamber. Jason spun around, his finger tightening on the trigger. What was that? "It's okay," Laura said, her voice strained. "It's just the system recalibrating. I'm almost done." But before she could finish, the lights flickered, and the hum of machinery grew louder. A metallic clang reverberated through the tunnel, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. The Zorathians had found them. "Fall back," Jason shouted, firing a burst of rounds down the corridor. Alien soldiers poured into the room, their sleek armor glinting in the dim light. They moved with terrifying precision, weapons blazing. "We're not ready," Laura cried, frantically working to complete the download. "Hold them off," Jason yelled, ducking behind a console as energy beams sizzled past his head. Sarah grabbed a piece of debris and hurled it at the nearest soldier, buying Laura a few precious seconds. Finally, the device beeped, signaling the transfer was complete. "Got it," Laura exclaimed, stuffing the device into her pocket. "Let's go." The team retreated toward the exit, trading fire with the advancing aliens. Bullets ricocheted off walls and sparks flew as explosions rocked the chamber. Jason covered the rear, ensuring no one was left behind. Just as they reached the maintenance tunnel, Laura activated a self-destruct sequence on the core system. "Move," she screamed, shoving Sarah ahead of her. The countdown began, a robotic voice echoing through the facility. "Core destabilization imminent. Evacuate immediately." They sprinted through the tunnel, the roar of collapsing machinery growing louder behind them. When they emerged into the night air, the ground shook violently as the command hub imploded, sending a shockwave rippling outward. Dust and debris rained down, coating them in a fine layer of grime. Coughing and gasping for breath, the team regrouped near the factory. Their faces were streaked with dirt and sweat, but their expressions were triumphant. Against all odds, they had succeeded. Back at GDI headquarters, Rachel paced anxiously as she waited for news of the mission. When the transmission finally came through, relief washed over her like a tidal wave. "You did it," she said softly, sinking into a chair. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe that humanity might stand a chance after all. But as the team celebrated their hard-won victory, they knew the battle was far from over. The Zerathians wouldn't take this loss lightly, and retaliation was inevitable. Still, for now, they had bought Earth some much-needed time, and proven that resistance was possible, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The stolen data from the Zerathian command hub was a treasure trove of information, but decoding it felt like trying to solve a puzzle written in a language no one understood. Back at GDI headquarters, Daniel Carter worked tirelessly alongside a team of cryptographers and engineers. The room buzzed with activity as screens displayed streams of alien symbols, strange waveforms, and complex algorithms. Every discovery brought new questions, but slowly, patterns began to emerge. "It's incredible," one of the scientists muttered, staring wide-eyed at his monitor. "Their technology is based on principles we don't even fully understand yet. Quantum entanglement isn't just a tool for them. It's the foundation of their entire empire." Daniel nodded, though his expression remained focused. "We already knew they're advanced. What we need to figure out is how to exploit their weaknesses. Can we disrupt these fields without causing collateral damage?" The scientist hesitated before answering. "Possibly, but it won't be easy. Their systems are designed to adapt quickly. If we try something once, they'll learn from it and counter us next time." Rachel Monroe entered the lab, her presence commanding immediate attention. She carried a tablet under one arm, its screen glowing faintly in the dim light. "Any progress?" she asked, her tone sharp but not unkind. "Some," Daniel replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "We've identified key nodes in their network that could act as choke points. Disrupting those might give us an edge, if we can hit them fast." "Enough." Rachel glanced at the tablet in her hand. "That's good news because we may not have much time. Reports are coming in from multiple cities. The Zerathians are stepping up their attacks. They know we struck back in Chicago and they're responding aggressively." Daniel frowned. "They're testing us again, seeing if we'll fold under pressure." "And if we don't?" Rachel pressed. "Then they escalate," Daniel said, grimly. "Which means we need to move faster than they expect." Meanwhile, word of the successful raid spread among the scattered pockets of resistance. In New York City, Jason Miller listened intently as Laura Hayes explained the mission's outcome over a secure radio channel. Their small group had relocated to a different section of the subway tunnels after fears of being discovered forced them to abandon their previous hideout. The air smelled of damp concrete and rust, but it was safe for now. They got the data? Laura said, her voice crackling slightly through the static. GDI thinks they can use it to disrupt the aliens' coordination, but they'll need more time to build the tech. Jason leaned against a wall, his rifle resting across his knees. Time is something we don't have, he muttered. Every day we wait, more people die. I know, Laura replied, her tone softening. But this could change everything. We just have to hold on a little longer. Jason didn't respond immediately. He thought about the faces of the survivors huddled nearby, their expressions etched with exhaustion and fear. Children clung to their parents, while others sat silently, staring into the darkness. They were counting on him to keep them safe, but Jason wasn't sure how much longer he could shoulder that responsibility. Still, giving up wasn't an option, not when there was still hope. All right, he said finally. What do you need me to do? For now, stay hidden, Laura instructed, and keep gathering intel. Anything you find could help GDI refine their plans. Jason nodded, though unease lingered in his mind. Staying hidden meant waiting, and waiting meant trusting others to fight the battles he couldn't. It wasn't easy, but he knew Laura was right. For now, survival came first. In London, Sarah Bennett tended to the wounded in their makeshift warehouse sanctuary. Supplies were running dangerously low and the injuries kept piling up. A young boy lay on a cot, his leg wrapped in a makeshift bandage soaked with blood. His mother sat beside him, holding his hand tightly and murmuring words of comfort. Sarah knelt beside them, checking the boy's pulse and adjusting the bandage as best she could. He's stable for now, she told the mother gently, but we need proper medicine soon. These wounds will get infected if we can't treat them properly. The woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Sarah forced a smile, though her heart ached with frustration. She wanted to do more, to fix things, but her hands were tied by circumstances beyond her control. As she moved to check on another patient, Alex approached her cautiously. The teenager carried a backpack slung over one shoulder, its contents shifting slightly as he walked. What is it? Sarah asked, noticing the look of urgency on his face. We found something, Alex said quietly. While we were scavenging, it's hard to explain. You should come see. Curiosity outweighed caution, and Sarah followed him to a corner of the warehouse where several survivors had gathered around a pile of debris. Beneath the rubble lay what appeared to be a damaged piece of alien technology, a jagged shard of metal pulsating faintly with blue light. Its surface was etched with intricate patterns that shifted and shimmered like liquid. Where did you find this? Sarah asked, crouching to examine it more closely. In an alley near here, Alex replied. It was half buried under some wreckage. We thought you should take a look. Sarah hesitated, unsure whether touching it was safe. Alien tech was unpredictable, and tampering with it could have disastrous consequences. Still, the device might hold valuable insights, information that could aid GDI in their efforts. Wrap it up carefully, she instructed. We'll send it to headquarters. Maybe they can figure out what it does. Alex nodded and began wrapping, the shard in cloth. As he worked, Sarah turned her attention back to the wounded, her mind racing with possibilities. If humanity could learn to harness even a fraction of the Zarathians' technology, it might tip the scales in their favor. At GDI headquarters, Rachel convened another meeting to discuss the latest developments. The mood in the room was tense, but hopeful. For the first time since the invasion began, there was a sense that humanity might actually stand a chance. The data from Chicago confirms our suspicions, Daniel explained, addressing the group. Their quantum entanglement fields rely on centralized hubs. Take out those hubs and their forces lose cohesion, at least temporarily. A military officer raised a hand. How many hubs are there? At least a dozen, Daniel replied. Possibly more. Each one controls a specific region of Earth. If we can destroy or disable them simultaneously, we might cripple their operations long enough to launch a coordinated counterattack. Rachel stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the room. This is our opportunity. But we'll need to act quickly and decisively. The Zorathians aren't going to sit back and let us dismantle their empire. What about casualties? Someone asked. If we go after these hubs, we'll be walking straight into enemy territory. People are going to die. Rachel's expression hardened. Yes, people will die. But if we don't fight, billions more will suffer. This isn't just about winning, it's about survival. The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. Finally, the officer who had spoken earlier nodded. All right, let's do this. As preparations for the next phase of the mission began, Daniel returned to his lab to oversee the development of the disruption devices. Engineers worked around the clock, assembling prototypes and running simulations. Each iteration brought them closer to a functional weapon capable of targeting the Zorathian hubs. Rachel joined him late one night, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She placed one beside him and leaned against the desk, watching as he adjusted a piece of equipment. You think this will work? She asked after a long pause. Daniel glanced up, his expression thoughtful. I think it has to. If we can pull this off, we'll buy ourselves a fighting chance, but nothing's guaranteed. Rachel nodded, sipping her coffee. Then let's make sure it counts. Outside, the alien ships still loomed in the sky, casting long shadows over a planet struggling to survive. Humanity's future hung in the balance, uncertain and fragile. Yet amidst the fear and despair, sparks of resistance burned brightly, refusing to be extinguished. The plan to disrupt the Zorathian quantum entanglement hubs was daring, but it required more than just human ingenuity. Daniel Carter and Rachel Monroe knew they couldn't win this fight alone. They needed allies, people who understood the Zorathians' weaknesses better than humanity ever could. That meant reaching out to the Krylos Syndicate, a faction of rebels within the alien empire. Using encrypted communications hidden within Zorathian frequencies, GDI managed to establish contact with the Krylos. Their leader, Zanara, agreed to meet secretly aboard a derelict space station orbiting near Saturn. The station, once a hub for mining operations, had been abandoned decades ago and now drifted silently through the void. It was the perfect location for a clandestine rendezvous. Daniel volunteered to lead the mission, knowing full well the risks involved. He selected a small crew to accompany him. Laura Hayes, whose expertise in alien tech would be invaluable. Jason Miller, whose combat skills made him an ideal choice for security. And Sarah Bennett, whose medical knowledge ensured they'd have someone to patch them up if things went wrong. Together, they boarded the Odyssey, a prototype stealth ship designed specifically for missions like this. The journey to the space station took several days, during which the crew prepared both, mentally and physically. The Odyssey was cramped and uncomfortable, its interior lined with exposed wires and blinking control panels. Laura spent most of her time in the cockpit, monitoring their trajectory and ensuring they remained undetected. Jason prowled the narrow corridors, checking weapons and running drills with the others. Sarah kept to herself, tending to minor injuries and making sure everyone stayed healthy. As they approached the station, tension filled the air. Through the viewport, the structure loomed large, a hulking mass of metal and glass, its surface pockmarked with scars from micrometeorite impacts. Lights flickered faintly inside, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. Stay sharp, Daniel warned as they docked. We don't know what we're walking into. The team disembarked cautiously, their boots echoing softly on the cold floor. Dust floated lazily in the low gravity, catching the dim light of distant stars streaming through broken windows. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of metal shifting under stress. They moved deeper into the station, following coordinates provided by Zanara. At last, they reached a large chamber where a figure stood waiting. She was tall and slender, her skin shimmering faintly with iridescent hues. Her eyes glowed faintly blue, and her voice carried an ethereal quality when she spoke. You are brave to come here, Zanara said, inclining her head slightly. Or perhaps desperate. We're both, Daniel replied, stepping forward. You know why we're here. We need your help. Zainara studied him for a moment before nodding. Your species is resilient, I'll give you that. Few civilizations survived their first encounter with the Zorathian Empire. Yet here you are, still fighting. We don't have a choice, Rachel interjected, joining the conversation. If we lose, Earth is finished. And if you win? Zainara asked, raising an eyebrow. What then? Do you think destroying the hubs will end the war? The Empire spans thousands of worlds. Even weakened, it will not fall easily. We're not trying to destroy the entire empire, Daniel explained, just enough to give us a chance to protect our home. Zainara considered this for a long moment. Finally, she nodded again. Very well, I will share what I know. But understand this. My people have suffered greatly under the Zorathians. If we aid you, it must benefit us as well. Fair enough, Rachel said quickly. What do you want? For now, weapons, Zainara replied, and access to your technology. In return, I offer intelligence and safe passage for your forces during critical moments. It was a risky bargain, but one they couldn't afford to refuse. The team exchanged uneasy glances before Daniel extended his hand. Deal. Over the next few hours, Zainara shared crucial information about the Zorathian network. She revealed the locations of additional hubs as well as vulnerabilities in their defenses. According to her, the hubs were protected by automated drones and shield generators, but these systems relied on predictable patterns that could be exploited. Laura listened intently, jotting down notes on a tablet. This is exactly what we needed, she said excitedly. With this info, we can refine our disruption devices and target the hubs more effectively. Jason remained skeptical, keeping a watchful eye on Zainara. How do we know we can trust her? He whispered to Daniel during a break. We don't, Daniel admitted, but right now she's all we've got. Sarah stayed close to Laura, asking questions about the data and offering suggestions based on her observations. Despite the danger, she felt a spark of hope. For the first time since the invasion began, it seemed like humanity might actually have a shot at turning the tide. As the meeting drew to a close, Zainara escorted them back to the docking bay. Before they parted ways, she offered one final piece of advice. The Zorathians are arrogant, she said. They believe themselves invincible. Use that against them. Strike hard and fast and leave no trace until it's too late. We will, Daniel promised, shaking her hand once more. The team reboarded the Odyssey and set course for Earth. As they left the station behind, Laura reviewed the intel. Zainara had provided, her excitement growing with each passing minute. This changes everything, she murmured. We can cripple their operations long enough to launch a counterattack. Jason leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. Let's just hope it works. If we mess this up, we're dead. Sarah glanced at him, her expression softening. We won't mess it up. We can't. Daniel stood quietly near the viewport, watching as the stars streaked past. The weight of leadership pressed heavily on his shoulders, but he refused to let doubt take hold. Humanity's survival depended on this mission, and he intended to see it through no matter the cost. Back on Earth, Rachel waited anxiously for news of the team's return. When the Odyssey finally touched down at GDI headquarters, she greeted them personally, her relief evident despite her composed demeanor. Did it work? She asked immediately. It did, Daniel confirmed, handing her a data drive containing the intel from Zainara. We've got everything we need to move forward. Rachel nodded, clutching the drive tightly. Then let's get to work. The facility buzzed with renewed energy as scientists and engineers pored over the new information. Plans were refined, strategies adjusted, and equipment tested repeatedly. Every second counted and no detail was overlooked. The team knew the coming battle would be their greatest challenge yet, but they also knew failure wasn't an option. Outside, the alien ships still dominated the skies, their presence a constant reminder of the threat looming over humanity. Yet amidst the fear and uncertainty, there was a growing sense of determination. People from all walks of life, soldiers, civilians, leaders, and ordinary citizens, came together in a united effort to reclaim their world. For the first time since the invasion began, it felt like victory might actually be within reach. All they had to do was fight for it, one step at a time.